Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you that opportunity that has been given to me. Let me introduce myself. My name is Haslinda and I'm from Class B. Yeah, okay. Well, here I will read a summary starting from the first meeting to the seventh meeting in the language testing course. On February 10, 2025, at the first meeting in the language testing course, we held the first lecture of the academic forum or the first meeting for all English language education study programs via online Zoom starting from 9 o'clock until finish, and there were also lecture present at the first lecture to discuss lecture contract and others. Next, for the second meeting, we held a face-to-face lecture on campus, and there we discussed the lecture contracts again, although it had been discussed in the first lecture, and there was all a group division for the next meeting, where each group could do a presentation, and there was also a quiz. So before doing the presentation, we did a quiz first. After that, we went to the language testing material. What is language testing? Yeah, language testing is the process of evaluating a person's language skill, both in spoken and written aspect. The purpose of language testing is to measure the extent to which an individual can use language in a real communication context. Yeah. Next, assessment and testing. Assessment is a popular and sometimes misunderstood term in today's educational practice. Assessment is to assess or measure the level of a person's mastery. This assessment is through a continuous process using various techniques or methods. Measuring and evaluation. Measuring is the process of measuring or evaluating a student's grade or performance in the class. Evaluation is a process of taking or collection a person's test scores to analyze information to determine the extent of the person's abilities. Assessment and learning. Assessment is a process of evaluating to measure a person's level of ability. Learning is the process of updating sometimes through a learning process. So from the process of not knowing to be knowing usually is done repeat to find out and achieve good result. Next, informal and formal assessment. Informal assessment is a way or method as to collect information without using standard or formal tests. Formal assessment is a procedure created to provide assessment to teacher or the students to determine students' abilities or assignment. Next, formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment is a process of developing skill and monitoring students with the aim of students being able to provide good feedback. Summative assessment is a evaluating or assessment process carried out after class to achieve good students' learning outcomes. Types and purpose of assessment. The first achievement test, and the second proficiency test, and the third placement test, and the 4 diagnostic tests, and the 5 aptitude tests. Issues in language assessment then and now. Historical language testing trends and practice have evolved through teaching methodology born in late 2070. Teaching by practice principle. There is dynamic assessment and essential pragmatism and use of technology in testing. Next, language assessment. Language assessment is the process of measuring a person's language ability in various aspects, such as speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Principle of language assessment. There are several principles of language, including the first validity. The assessment must measure what they intended to measure, and the second reliability. An assessment shall produce some result over time in different contexts, or a person's score shall remain the same even if they take the assessment related. And the third, fairness. An assessment must ensure that all learners have an equal opportunity to demonstrate their language skills. And the fourth, practicality. An assessment must depend on time, resources, and logistics. And the fifth, respect. An assessment should provide positive results that can encourage students to use language in a good way for their language development. And the sixth, authenticity. Assessment must be consistent with how language is as in the real world. And the seventh, transparency. The assessment process must be clear and easy to understand by the assessor and the students. Next, taking classroom language tests. The language test design process in the process of creating a language to measure students' abilities, which focus on the validity and effectiveness of measuring students' learning progress. Types of language tests. The first, the language proficiency test, and the second, a language skill test, and the third, placement test, and the fourth, diagnostic test, and the fifth, the achievement test. Next, practical steps to test construction. The first, assessing clear and unambiguous objective, and the second, developing test specification, and the third, developing testing, and the fourth, designing test items multiple choice. Next, standard-based assessment. Standard-based assessment is a way to evaluate students' performance using predetermined standards that usually include competence that students should have in particular area. Designing English language standard. Designing English language standard means establishing the reliabilities and skill that students have in speaking, listening, reading, and writing. Consequence of standard-based assessment and SOR testing. Standard-based assessment can be used to analyze overall student performance and to design intervention here to improve learning. Standardized testing. Standardized testing is not limited to standard-based assessment, but also involves systematic administration and scoring A standardized test is the result of expensive research and development. Advantage and disadvantage. The first advantage, efficient and practical, able to save teacher time, and next, validate and reliable, pre-tested for accuracy and fairness. Next, phase assessment and opportunity. This is specific for multiple choice formula. And the second is this disadvantages. Potential for abuse, it is sometimes as inappropriately. For example, she'll test as achievement test. Next, bias and indirect testing, which might not fully reflect the actual ability of the test text. And last, wrong authoring the test does not have content validation. Okay, I think enough for me about the first red summary, the first meeting until 7 meeting. Thank you so much and thank you for attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.